So you can pretty much get the idea that I'm getting across in the title and thumbnail, and that is Kenjaku just doesn't belong among those guys. And it's not that Kenjaku is weak, because he isn't. It's just that there was a series of events that led to people overhyping Kenjaku, and this is because of a couple of factors. One is, well, Gojo had been sealed for a long time up until recently. And the second factor is, also until recently, Sukuna hadn't had a super high tier fight. Like, think about everything before the Yorozu fight with Sukuna. The only high tier fight you could say Sukuna had was against Maharaga and maybe Jogo. And at the same time this was happening, Kenjaku beat a special grade sorcerer. And where was Gojo during all of this? He was sealed. So it's sort of, you have Kenjaku being the only person around having the most impressive fights. And while it is impressive, beating a special grade is no small feat, people began to take it a bit too far. People began to put Kenjaku on the same level is Gojo and Sukuna. And what I mean by level is that if you look in Jujutsu Kaisen, not only have us fans gotten this across, but also Gege, there's a special grade level, but then there's also this title that seems like the strongest. And there's only a couple people who should be in that strongest category. One of them obviously is Gojo, and the other, especially recently, should be Sukuna. Because Sukuna has just seemed like the darkness if Gojo was the light. Sukuna would be that other side of the coin. Ever since the beginning of the series, it's been Gojo's on the good guy side and he's the strongest for them, and Sukuna's on the bad guy side and he's the strongest for them. And so throughout the entire series, we've had this build up between Gojo, who's the strongest, and this king of curses, who was Sukuna. So these two guys obviously would be held and regarded as the two strongest people. But then after Kenjaku beat Yuki and Sukuna and Gojo hadn't done anything in a while, people began to put Kenjaku up there with them a little too hastily. If we just take a look at Gojo, for example, Kenjaku has made it obvious on so many different occasions that he is just weaker than Gojo, that he doesn't stand a chance in fighting him, which is why he went through this entire roundabout plan of sealing him. And we saw that Kenjaku actually did this twice in the past to previous 6 Eyes users. Kenjaku is so scared of users of the 6 Eyes that he even killed a child who was born just because the baby had the 6 Eyes. Now there are many times that Kenjaku outright says that Gojo is too strong for his plans, but if you remember back at the scene where Kenjaku was sitting at the dining table, he says to the disaster curses there are 2 things that needs to happen before they can go and win the war. One of the things is to immobilize Satoru Gojo and remove him from the fight, and the second thing they need to do is make an ally of Ryoma and Sukuna. So it's once again like Kenjaku putting himself lower than these 2 people, Gojo and Sukuna, saying that we need to get rid of Gojo and grab Sukuna. And it's just even funny because Kenjaku is admitting here that even with his own power, combined with all of the disaster curses, they wouldn't stand a chance, which is why he needs the help of Sukuna, somebody who he believes is strong enough to bring his plans into fruition. And although there are many statements just outright calling Gojo the strongest, one of the most important and best statements that there probably is that in the end of a chapter, in a chapter extra, it says that Satoru Gojo is the strongest character to appear in the manga. And this is more important than just a statement where Gojo himself says that he's the strongest, or somebody says that Gojo is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, because some people might say, oh well, Kenjaku doesn't count as a Jujutsu sorcerer, just things like that. But in this chapter extra, it's just outright saying that Satoru Gojo is the strongest character. And there are a couple more important statements that appear in the fan book, and I'll just show them to you now. One of them just says that, once again, Gojo just is the strongest character that has appeared so far. Another statement comes from when Gege was asked, how did you come up with the character of Satoru Gojo? And Gege says, I wanted an uncomplicated power ceiling / pinnacle. Basically saying that Gojo is supposed to be the height of this sorcery. Gojo is supposed to be the height of power within Jujutsu Kaisen. And another statement is actually under Kenjaku's section in the fan book, and is sort of questioning why did Kenjaku never consider taking over Gojo's body, and Gege outright says that taking over Gojo is impossible. To put it simply, you can't kill him. So as you can see, there's just this aura around Gojo and just outright statements that he's not only supposed to be the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, but just the strongest person or thing within the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. Also, I do want to note that the fan book only covers up to chapter 133, and this is just basically around the time that Yuji just got done beating Mahito. So this is basically post Shibuya right after Gojo had been getting sealed, and we were sort of transitioning into the Culling games. And after the buildup of such a strong character in Gojo, this is where Sukuna becomes introduced, and this is where we have statements where Yuji asks Gojo, well, who would win if you and Prime Sukuna were to ever fight? And Gojo said, it would be close, but I would win. And this immediately basically took everyone by surprise, because if Gojo is supposed to be this strong, he is the strongest person around, who is this guy who can give him a close fight? And it's no surprise that it would be Sukuna, because on one of the back of the volume covers, it says, Ryomen Sukuna has been lost and scattered about. Should any demon consume Sukuna's body parts, the power they gain could destroy the world as we know it. So it's like, yeah, this is why Kenjaku wanted this guy. This guy is so powerful that just gaining his power could destroy the entire world as we know it. And this is a guy who exists in the same manga as Satoru Gojo. These two people are supposed to be the ceiling, which is why Kenjaku himself just submits whenever it comes to talking about the height. He always says that Gojo is too strong, Gojo is always in the way, and that he needs Sukuna because Sukuna is the only guy who can match Gojo. And we also have this moment where, remember when Jogo fed Sukuna some more of the fingers? But when Sukuna got up, Jogo said, Sukuna's strength is different than that of Satoru Gojo's. It's overwhelmingly evil. I'm scared that any move we make will mean our deaths. This is how powerful Sukuna is. It's not like he's saying Sukuna is more powerful than Gojo, it's just that his strength is different. His strength has such an evil aura to it that he's afraid to even move, which just goes back to like the bad and good side of the coin. Like Gojo is supposed to be the people's hero, while Sukuna is supposed to be the people's downfall. Do you remember when Sukuna fought Jogo, and right before he killed him, he gave him this sort of philosophy lesson? He said to Jogo, it makes it all the more foolish. Humans flocking together, curses flocking together, comparing themselves to those around them, leads to weakness and stunts their growth. You should have burnt everything you desired to a cinder, to reach the heights of Satoru Gojo and not worry about your future or identity, but you lack the hunger to take hold of your desires. So as you can see here, whenever it comes to reaching the height of heights, you see that the person that Sukuna brings up is Gojo. It's sort of like a respect moment, you could say, is although he does want to fight and kill Gojo, he can recognize here that Gojo is the peak. He's saying that in order to reach this height, Jogo had to have changed his ways. And if you've noticed throughout like all of these height statements or strongest statements or we need this guy statements, they're never about Kenjaku. Now that's not like to disrespect Kenjaku, because like I said, he is strong. It's just that if you look at two sides, Gojo and Sukuna are just the highest there possibly is. And there are also like strong people below them, like Yuta, for example. Yuta would be an example of a strong special grade sorcerer, but even Yuta is just like a level below Satoru Gojo. And it would be the same on the villain side as like Sukuna and Kenjaku. Yes, Kenjaku is super strong, but he's still a level below Gojo and Sukuna. And it's even further supported in the recent chapter where when Gojo comes back, Kenjaku actually thought that he had dealt with Gojo, because Kenjaku had put the prison room 8,000 meters deep in a trench just in case Gojo ever got unsealed. And Gojo anyways just warped right in front of him. And upon seeing this, Kenjaku said, just what is wrong with you? And Gojo said to Kenjaku, you better choose your words wisely because they're going to be your last. And as Gojo begins to go attack Kenjaku, Sukuna comes in and basically saves Kenjaku's life. You can see sweat literally beating down Kenjaku's face because, as you know, and I know, and we all know, Kenjaku is sweating so hard because if Sukuna was not there, Gojo was right. Those words would have been Kenjaku's last words. And that is why Sukuna had to come in and sort of save the day for Kenjaku, because Kenjaku just isn't on that level. Now, if you look at Kenjaku's resume, it is very impressive. Like that fight with Yuki was not only impressive because of how he dealt with Yuki physically, but also how he dealt with the curse techniques. For example, when Yuki summoned a black hole at the end of the fight to sort of just take Kenjaku out along with herself, Kenjaku was smart enough to use an anti-gravity technique in the moment and save his own life. We also know that Kenjaku is supposed to be the second strongest barrier user in the world, right behind Tengen, so that is, another impressive thing that Kenjaku has. Also, just looking at Kenjaku's abilities, right? He has Suguru Geto's cursed spirit manipulation combined with his own gravity technique. And we know that the way Kenjaku's gravity technique works is basically like everything within a 2 to 3 meter radius around him gets smushed to the ground for 6 seconds. And then there's an interval before he can use the gravity technique again. And while he's waiting for it to recharge, he uses heavy cursed spirits to keep the opponent down. So it's like he has this perfect strategy combined with the cursed spirit manipulation and the gravity technique to where basically if you're not a top of the line sorcerer, you're just going to lose to Kenjaku. Even somebody who is supposed to be top of the line, a special grade sorcerer like Yuki lost to Kenjaku. But even as impressive as Kenjaku's feats are, they just don't match up to what we've been told about Gojo and Sukuna. There's another statement in the fanbook about Gojo that says, the fate of the Jujutsu world rests on his shoulders. This is insane. Like, yes, Kenjaku is very powerful, Yuki's very powerful, Yuta is very powerful, but the fate of the entire Jujutsu world rests on one man's shoulders, that being Satoru Gojo. And if you look at what Sukuna has been doing recently, all of the things we have been told about Sukuna, the whole king of curses, he's this sort of duality to Gojo, this was all before he gained Megami's body. So now he has the 10 Shadows technique and Maharaga by his side. And with Maharaga comes one of the most broken abilities in Jujutsu Kaisen, and that is the ability to adapt and overcome any and all phenomena. And I know that this sounds very vague at first, like the ability to adapt and overcome any and all phenomena, but the way it just works is that if you hit Maharaga with an attack and you don't kill Maharaga with it, then he will just adapt to the attack and it won't work any further. And this is what happened when Sukuna was fighting Maharaga. He was using his normal attacks, the slashes, dismantle, and cleave, and because Maharaga wasn't dying to these attacks, he adapted to them, and then slashing attacks wouldn't work any longer. It even came to a point where once Sukuna activated his domain expansion, even getting slashed multiple times didn't kill Maharaga because he had already adapted to the slashes. And this is why Sukuna had to use a new attack to finally finish Maharaga off, and that was his Flames attack. And all the flames do is burn somebody down to their bone marrow. So this is why it was able to take Maharaga down upon first hit, because it burned Maharaga to his bone marrow and he wasn't able to adapt because Maharaga just died. And we even saw that Sukuna has more of the 10 shadows. He has that bull that gets stronger the further it travels. He has a super large Nue. He also has that one Shikigami that just performs reverse curse technique. So Sukuna is just completely stacked on new abilities by this point. And then we have Gojo, who on the other side is just stacked with Infinity, the Limitless technique with red and blue and purple. So these two guys just have the best abilities in the show. It's no wonder that these two people are the strongest in the series. And this is why the fight at the end of the series is supposed to be Sukuna versus Gojo. This is the fight that has been being built up since the beginning of the series, and this is the fight that Kenjaku is supposed to be a bystander for, because we have all been waiting for the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer to come across and fight the strongest curse. And I will say this, it's not Kenjaku's fault that people put him on the same level as Gojo and Sukuna. It is the people's fault who began to just overrate him because Gojo was sealed and Sukuna hadn't fought like a special grade level sorcerer, so people just took Kenjaku beating a special grade level sorcerer and ran with it. Because Kenjaku honestly is pretty humble. He always sort of admits that Gojo is stronger than he is, Gojo is too strong, and that he does need Sukuna. So if anything, we can't blame Kenjaku because he himself admits that he isn't on that level. And once again, I just want to say this is not a Kenjaku bash video because I do recognize that Kenjaku is very strong. It's just that if you look back at all of the things I covered, all of the statements about Gojo being an uncomplicated power ceiling and how Sukuna is the only person who can give him a close fight, and all of the other things, how Gojo is the strongest sorcerer while Sukuna is the strongest curse, you just begin to realize that there is just a duality between Gojo and Sukuna, that they are supposed to be the two strongest people in the series, and everybody else, even special grades, are just a level below them. And with that being said, I want to thank you for reaching the end of the video. And if you enjoyed, then I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post every couple days on different topics that you guys give me and a few I come up with on my own. Thank you for watching. See you next time.